Stability is usually described as a goal, something to reach, something to protect, a place where uncertainty disappears. Stable income, stable routine, stable life. It sounds like relief. And for a while, it is. Stability reduces noise, it removes surprises, it makes the future feel manageable. That feeling is powerful. Not because stability is free, but because it's predictable. Predictability feels like control, even when it isn't. Most people don't chase stability for comfort, they chase it for certainty. Certainty about bills, certainty about schedules, certainty about expectations. Certainty reduces anxiety, and anxiety is expensive emotionally. But stability comes with a structure, and structures have costs. Not obvious ones, quiet ones. Stable lives are built on fixed assumptions. Fixed income, fixed expenses, fixed routines. Once those assumptions are in place, they stop being questioned. They become requirements. Rent isn't optional anymore. Time off isn't flexible anymore. Movement becomes complicated. Nothing feels wrong. That's the point. Stability doesn't announce its price. It spreads it out. Small commitments accumulate. Predictable comforts stack. Routines harden into obligations. Each decision feels reasonable on its own. Together, they form a lock. This is why stability feels safe, because nothing breaks suddenly. But safety and flexibility are not the same thing. Stability reduces volatility. It doesn't reduce dependency. The more stable life becomes, the more pieces must stay in place for it to continue feeling stable. Income must arrive on time. Costs must remain predictable. Energy must stay consistent. The system can't wobble. That requirement is rarely acknowledged because stability works until something changes. Not dramatically, quietly. A cost increases, a schedule tightens, flexibility disappears. And suddenly, stability feels heavier than expected. Not unsafe, just expensive. This is where confusion begins, because stability did what it promised. It reduced uncertainty. It just increased commitment at the same time. Most people never examine this trade because the cost doesn't show up as a bill. It shows up as rigidity, as fewer options, as slower movement. And because it arrives gradually, it feels normal, even responsible. This isn't an argument against stability. It's an observation about it. Stability isn't free. It's financed through structure. And once that structure is in place, it quietly expects to be maintained. Pause for a second. If you're still listening, it's probably because this didn't feel exaggerated. That's intentional. If this way of thinking matters to you, like the video, subscribe. We'll keep going deeper. The moment stability settles in, costs stop behaving the way people expect them to. Not because something went wrong, but because structure took over. Stable lives are built on fixed costs. Rent doesn't change based on effort. Insurance doesn't adjust for discipline. Utilities don't respond to motivation. They simply exist. At first, fixed costs feel manageable. They're chosen carefully. They're justified logically. They match the current income. That alignment creates comfort. Bills are predictable. Payments are scheduled. Nothing feels out of control. But fixed costs don't stay aligned. They stay fixed. Income moves. It fluctuates. It slows. It pauses. Effort can increase income temporarily, but effort doesn't negotiate fixed costs. They don't listen. They don't care. This is where stability becomes expensive, not because costs explode, but because they become immovable. Once something is fixed, it demands consistency, every month, on time, without exception. The system stops asking if you can pay, it assumes you will. This assumption changes behavior. Risk becomes threatening. Flexibility feels irresponsible. Options narrow quietly. People don't notice this shift immediately because nothing breaks. Everything still works. That's what makes it effective. Fixed costs reward stability, but they punish interruption. A single missed payment doesn't just create stress, it exposes how tight the structure is. This is when effort gets misinterpreted. People work harder not because it helps structurally, but because it feels necessary emotionally. More hours, more output, less margin. Effort becomes defensive, not aspirational. The goal isn't progress anymore, it's maintenance. Maintenance doesn't feel like failure, it feels responsible. But responsibility without flexibility creates fragility. Everything depends on everything else continuing. Fixed costs don't scale down gracefully. They either get paid or they don't. This is why stable lives often feel heavier over time, not because people overspent, but because commitments stacked. Each new fixed cost reduced optionality slightly, until optionality disappeared altogether. Stability didn't fail. It just did what fixed structures do. They demand consistency regardless of effort, regardless of intention. That's the hidden price of predictability. Not money alone, but flexibility surrendered quietly. Most people never calculate that cost because it doesn't arrive as a number. It arrives as obligation, as pressure, as a narrowing of choices. And once fixed costs dominate the structure, effort stops changing the equation. It only keeps it running. Most content talks at you. This one sits with you. If that difference stood out, if this felt real instead of loud, like the video, subscribe. This channel is built for people who notice patterns. Comfort rarely feels like a decision. It feels like a consequence, something that arrives after effort has already been spent. Work hard long enough and comfort feels earned. A better place to live, reliable routines, fewer disruptions. None of that feels excessive. It feels reasonable. That's why comfort is rarely questioned. It doesn't look like risk. Comfort removes friction. It saves time. It reduces stress. It smooths daily life. But friction is also feedback. And when friction disappears, so does information. Comfort doesn't announce its trade. It doesn't say what it's costing. It just asks to be maintained. Once comfort is in place, life reorganizes around it. Schedules adapt. Expenses stabilize. Expectations harden. What started as convenience becomes requirement, not because anyone demanded it, but because it's now normal. Normal is powerful. Normal defines what feels risky. Anything that threatens comfort starts to feel irresponsible, even if it creates opportunity. This is how comfort becomes a lock. Not suddenly, not dramatically, incrementally. Each layer of comfort reduces tolerance for disruption. Flexibility shrinks quietly. People don't stop moving because they're afraid. They stop moving because movement threatens stability. Comfort reframes risk, not as uncertainty, but as loss. Loss of routine, loss of predictability, loss of what currently works. This is why comfort feels protective. It guards what exists. But protection and progress rarely point in the same direction. Comfort doesn't eliminate ambition, it redirects it. Goals shift from expansion to preservation, from exploration to maintenance. Nothing is wrong. That's what makes the lock effective. People don't feel trapped, they feel settled. And settlement feels like maturity, like responsibility. But over time, settlement hardens into immobility. The system works as long as nothing changes. That condition rarely gets examined. Comfort isn't a mistake. It's a trade. Less friction now in exchange for fewer options later. Most people make that trade without realizing it's happening, because comfort never presents itself as a cost. It presents itself as relief, as stability. And once relief becomes the priority, flexibility quietly exits the room. If this made sense to you, you already understand more than most people do. This channel exists for that kind of awareness. Like the video, subscribe. Nothing here is accidental. By the time stability feels expensive, it has usually already worked. Not failed, not collapsed. Worked exactly as intended. Bills are predictable. Routines are reliable. Life feels organized. That's why stability is so attractive. It replaces uncertainty with structure. But structure always comes with conditions. Conditions don't announce themselves. They reveal themselves over time. Stable systems assume continuity, that income continues, that energy remains available, that circumstances don't shift too far. As long as those assumptions hold, stability feels like safety. When they don't, it feels like weight. Not danger, just pressure. This is the trade most people never articulate. Less volatility now for fewer options later. Comfort smooths the present. It doesn't expand the future. That doesn't make comfort wrong. It makes it specific. Stability solves short-term uncertainty. It doesn't solve long-term rigidity. Over time, people notice this quietly, not as regret, but as limitation. They feel less able to pivot, less able to absorb change, less tolerant of disruption. Not because they became weaker, but because their structure became tighter. Every stable decision narrowed the path slightly, until the path felt fixed. At that point, stability stops feeling neutral. It feels expensive. Expensive not only in money, but in optionality, in time, in movement, in choice. This is where confusion usually turns into self-criticism. People assume they made mistakes. Often they didn't. They simply accepted a trade that wasn't explained to them. Stability isn't the enemy. Blind commitment to it is. There's nothing wrong with wanting predictability, but predictability has a carrying cost. Once that cost is understood, stability stops being confusing. It becomes contextual. Not something to reject, not something to worship, something to weigh. That awareness doesn't demand action. It demands honesty. Because once you see the trade clearly, you stop mistaking comfort for progress and stability for freedom. If this helped you see stability differently, if this gave language to a pressure you couldn't explain, like the video, subscribe, turn on notifications. More clarity is coming.